The big question, why doesn't a long box that's supposed to hold 400 comics hold 400 comics? We'll find out right after this. The answer's not that difficult. It requires a little math. I'll do the math instead of making you do it. But before we get started, I feel like pissing off every comic collector on the planet with a single statement. Your comics, every single one of them, no matter when it was made, no matter what the grade, has a crease right down the middle. Now, I'm pretty sure there are people ready to unsub because of that outrageous statement, and they have a slabbed book that's a 9.8 and it doesn't have any creases. Yeah, that's wrong. Even a 10.0 comic has a crease. I'll explain. You grab a comic. Now you want to hold the comic so it's facing you, and not the way I have this one. Take a look at the left-hand side. That will be this side of the comic. Do you see the crease yet? It's called a spine. And it's on every single comic. And if you're holding up an 80-page giant or a 100-page super spectacular, there's two creases, one on the front, one on the back. It's part of the spine. It's just the way comics are made. And now that I've messed with your head a little bit, let's move on to this comic book storage thing, because that's a good question. Why doesn't a long box advertise to hold 400 comics? A short box advertise to hold 200 comics? Why do they say that when it's obviously not true? To do that, we have to look at the numbers. And the first number we have to take into account is the thickness of a comic. And before we can figure out what the thickness of a comic is, we kind of have to know what the thickness of a single page is. And that's really thin, isn't it? Yeah, that's really thin. You have no idea. Now this one is a little thinner than the normal ones that you would see from 1950 to 1999 when they were using newsprint. And newsprint, you know, of course, comic books from 1950 to 1990 were basically 32 pages. There are exceptions, but a run-of-the-mill average comic book was 32 pages. And of course, you have to add the cover in, so that's 36 pages actually. You know, you count them. You count one for the front, and then one for the inside. That's 2, then 3, then 4, and like that. But the number of leaves or segments of the comic is a lot less than that, because when you hold it open like this, you got 8 on each leaf. But then it's folded, so you got 4 pages. Anyway, it works out to 18. Got 18, you know, not 9. You count from 1 to the middle, you get 9. Double that because it's folded. That's 18. That's where I got the 18 from. That's going to be important in a few minutes. Now, the average size of newsprint that's used in comics, or that was used in comics, is 3.2 mils thick. This is the same size as your average newspaper. 3.2 mils thick. And we're going to assume the cover's about the same thickness, although in reality it might be thinner or thicker, depending. But we're just going to say it's about the same thickness. So that gives us 18 at 3.2 mils. And you notice I've been saying mils, not millimeters, because there's a difference. There's a huge difference. In fact, a mil is 1/1000th of an inch, which means 1 mil would be 0.001. And a millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. And unless you were born yesterday, there's a pretty good chance you know that a meter is quite a bit larger than an inch. So, yeah. And did you know that a micron, which is a millionth of a meter, is 25.4 mils thick? There you go. Another little bit of knowledge you didn't care about and don't really need to know for this. But what does all this mean and why is it important? Well, basically it means that not including the staple, after being folded, a comic is 57.6 mils thick. And that means about 17 comics to an inch. The long box is usually 27 inches, so we're talking about 468 comics. Wow. You could put 468 comics in a long box if they didn't have those staples. Those pesky staples. Why do we have them anyway? Oh yeah, they hold the comic together. Staple thickness is about 15.6 mils. I know this because I figured it out in advance. So that means with the staples, per inch, you get about 13.6 comics per inch. 368 comics in a long box. No bags or boards, of course, just raw comics. Easy peasy. 368 comics. There you go. We're done. Wait, you do use comic bags? Now, comic bags are a whole nother story. They can range from 1 mil mylar, 1.5 mil poly, or up to 4 mils. Now, the most common size most people use, this is a poly bag, and the most common size people use is 2 mils. So, to our base calculations, we need to add 4 mils. I know, you're going, wait a minute, you said 2, why are you adding 4? 2 mils. Plus the comic, plus another 2 mils. It's 4 mils. So what are we at now? Well, I did the calculation, and what it works out to, provided you're not folding the flap over, and none of us do that, so we don't have to worry about that right now. Now we're at 12.95 per inch, or 349 for a long box. Still quite a few comics, for such a thin piece of plastic. It takes up quite a bit of room in your comic box, doesn't it? So there you go. 349 comics in a long box, probably about 170 in a short box. You're good. We're good. We can call it a day. Don't tell me you use boards too. Boards. Now this is a really old board, but it's still about the same thickness. And the thickness on the average comic book board is 24 point. Use 24 points. A 24-point board. Yeah, that's going to confuse you, isn't it? Now you don't get to be confused that easy, because a point is 1/1000th of an inch. So 24-point board is 24 mils. It's all good, but we do need to run the numbers again. When I run the numbers again, we come up with 9.88 comics per inch, or 266 to a long box. If you fold the flap down, you lose a few more comics, and if you add tape, depending on the type of tape, you might lose 10 or more comics per long box. So figure 250 comics per long box with bags and boards, and probably about half that, or about 120 for a short box, which is what I am used to putting in a short box, is between 100 and 120 comics, depending on how thick they are, because I have some really thick comics. There you go. Pretty easy, wasn't it? That's for optimal storage, and you still can peruse through the comics, although the short boxes tend to get a little tight when you have 120 in, but it works, and I've done it many times. But you can save a little money and maybe put a few more comics in your boxes. If instead of one bag or one bag and board per comic, you take 2 comics, put them back to back, put a board between them, like that, and then put them in the bag, back to back. How much do you save by doing it that way? Your comic box that only holds 250 your long comic box that only holds 250 comics when they're bagged and boarded. If you do it this way, look, the staple only counts on one side. Think about that for a minute. The board only counts for every other comic. The bag only counts for every other comic. You can increase your storage to over 300, close to 340. That's assuming you don't, that's assuming you fold your flaps and use some type of tape. 340 per long box. You can do it. It'll work. You got to do it this way. You got to, yeah. But there's another trick too. And I didn't really go into this, and I didn't do the calculations. But if you take your comic and you open it to the center, which, if I can find the center on this comic, this is a new comic, so it's hard to find the center. Take it, put the board in the center. And some of us do this because we want to see the wraparound cover. But if you put it in the center and then put it in there, you don't have to account for the staple thickness, because the board that is now in the center is thicker than the staple. Yeah, you have a little problem, because if you drop the comic and it lands on the spine, you're going to end up with a crease. But you know what? That's going to happen anyway. If you drop the comic, you're going to end up with a crease on the corner regardless. Just another way that you can increase the number. Not greatly. You're not going to get back to that 349, but you will be at about 300 per box, which is a good thing. And that's why you have only 300 comics in a 400 count box, or 250 comics if you're doing it bags and boards. And of course, if you use the 42-point boards, the number is going to be bigger. If you use the 4mm Mylar, the number is going to be bigger. You're going to get fewer comics in the box. That's just the way it is. But that's what we have here, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe you learned a little bit. Now you know why you can't put 400 comics in your 400 count comic box, which you can, but you got to take them all the bags and boards. Nobody wants to do that. I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So yeah, there you have it. And I will put the formula down in the description. I probably shouldn't, but I will, along with the numbers that I used. And we'll see you next video. And don't forget to check over here, because there should be a link right there for Horizon Picks Friday night auction. And I'll be there. Will you? Bye.